Wherever you are. If you're in North America, it's evening, 12 midnight, a little before, a little after. If you're in Israel, it's just after 7 o'clock in the morning right now. And we're broadcasting live from the Temple Mount. I'm Meir Weinstein, and I'm with Baruch Ben-Yoseph, who is waiting to get up to the Temple Mount. There's a little bit of delay. There were a lot of people that went ahead of him in their group, and the police are just saying, just hang on a little bit. We'll let another group up very soon. Baruch, what could you tell us about the atmosphere already there as you're waiting? You mentioned earlier to me you saw some arrests being made uh, of
Well,
anti-Semites who hate Jews. The police were doing some work. You noticed
what
there's a
happened was,
drone.
yeah,
Go
there's a
ahead.
drone in the air, keeping watch over the Temple Mount. There's in the police station I just came from. There's a high-level meeting of the top brass of the police. Yesterday, what happened was there was an attack on a Jewish vehicle in the neighborhood of Silwan, which uh,
Right.
which is like the city of David, and they attacked with Molotov cocktails and very big rocks. And there was an attempt to even open the door and throw in a Molotov cocktail. The police saw this about to happen, and they fired and wounded this Arab kid who was trying to do it, who was 13 years old. And as a result of that, the Arabs in the Temple Mount they barricaded themselves into the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and apparently some of the people that we saw earlier being arrested and dragged out of the Temple Mount by the police, part of that group that barricaded themselves into the Al-Aqsa Mosque. I mean, the Israeli police already have a lot of experience dealing with the Arabs, doing that on the Temple Mount. They're out here in full force. There's a lot of different units of the police. They have here the what's called the Assam. That's a special unit of the police that deals with these kind of situations. They have the border police here. They have the regular police. So they're prepared for any contingency. And as we saw, the first group went in with no problems. So that's a good sign that the police have it under control and that they're letting us visit despite the Arabs' threats.
Right.
Also claimed as part of their claim was that they suspected that the Jews are planning something on for Passover. Obviously, there was a lot of talk about the Korban Pesach, the Passover offering. The Jews were preparing to bring up this year, as for many years now, been a lot of discussions of it. Obviously, we haven't succeeded, but this every year becomes a an issue, and uh, and so that's another excuse for the Arabs to riot. See here, Rav Shimshon Elbaum, the head of the chairman of the Temple Movements, is here,
Right.
and it's a good sign. It's a good sign that he's here going to lead us up. Yeah, so that's the situation. I don't think there'll be a problem us getting up. It's just a question of how long. Um, Remember, because it's Ramadan, they only allow us up in the morning. There's no afternoon visit to the Temple Mount, so they have to facilitate all the people that are going to come. And usually, there's a lot of people come when it's the when it's a holiday or the eve of the holiday, especially
Right.
Passover, because the main focus of Passover is today is bringing the Korban Pesach, of course. So um, the like I said, for many years there've been I don't know if you call it attempts. I mean, there's obviously been demands brought on the government, on the police, on the courts to allow us to bring the Korban Pesach, the Passover offering, and the authorities don't allow it. They don't want it. They don't allow it. They figure it's going to cause World War III. And
Right.
even though it won't, I mean, we know it won't. We know it's the opposite. It won't bring World War III, but they don't understand. So we're basically stuck. Even Itamar Ben-Gvir, okay, our person who's been active in the Temple Mount for years, and has been one of the people that's called for the bringing of the Passover offering. Now that he's the minister of national security, he says now that he's not for bringing the Passover offering because of the situation, and so we see that even when our guys come to power, they all of a sudden change their position. So I don't expect much now. Seeing how Itamar is acting, I don't expect much for him as far as facilitating our rights to the Temple Mount.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, he'll stand up for our ability to go there and pray. That's about it. So under the present regime or present type of government, it's very hard to picture a drastic change in what goes on in Temple Mount. There'll be very slow changes, like we saw over the years, that they allow us now to pray, but more than that, you can't expect much. We can't expect that they'll allow us to build any kind of building, anything, even an altar. Obviously, bring sacrifices. They won't allow it. So we're really not. We've made some strides, but we're still way behind where we should be, and it'll take more than just. It will require a whole different form of government. Like we discussed, a king, which is the form of government dictated by the Torah, and as we know, it was the king, King Solomon, who built the temple, and that's the type of government that we need in order to allow us to serve God on the Temple Mount. It won't happen any other way. I don't see. For years, I mean, people believe that maybe under this form of government we'd be able, if we had a majority, we had the right people in government, maybe it would change. But I think now we see for sure that there's no hope. If Itamar Ben-Gvir could come out and say that he's against us bringing the Passover offering, I mean, that just says it all. So, sorry to be the bearer of bad tidings, but that's. I mean, what do you think, Mayor?
Well, I think one thing we have to continuously go up. That's number one. Number two, we have to push for permanent learning, Torah learning, in a proper manner on the Temple Mount. And when you look at the size of the area that we're even talking about, we're talking about taking up maybe 0.1% of the Temple Mount to do our Torah learning. It's absolutely ridiculous that that hasn't happened yet, but that's something we're pushing for. And more than that, open prayer. There should be no reason why that's held up. If you want to have a discussion about the Korban Pesach, that this rabbi says this and that rabbi says that, okay, then let's have open discussions about the Korban Pesach on the Temple Mount, and not hiding in a corner or anything like that. This belongs to us, this site. It's the Jewish site. The Israeli army won in 1967 against all odds, and we didn't want the war. And we won, and we came back to unbelievable areas that we thought we would never see. And the Temple Mount was desecrated by Jordan when they controlled it. And there's no reason in the world that we shouldn't, that the Jewish people shouldn't beautify it. It's
Well,
so special to us.
I want to tell you something. That
Mhm.
information has come out recently
Yep,
because we always blamed the Moshe Dayan, who was at the
right.
time of the Six Day War. He was
Mhm.
the defense
Defense
minister,
minister. Yep,
and everybody blamed him for turning the Temple Mount over back to the Arabs, to the Muslim Trust.
yep,
And now information has come out over the past few years that shows that it was Moshe Dayan was not really the bad guy. The bad guys were the rabbis, um, both Haredi and both national religious rabbis.
yeah,
That Moshe Dayan, well, the first of all, we know that right away the rabbis from Agudat Yisrael, the Haredi rabbis, came out and demanded that the Temple Mount be given back to the Arabs
yeah,
because they don't want to have to build a temple and make sacrifices. And but even more worse over is that um, that the national religious rabbis, led by Rabbi Levinger, Moshe Levinger from Hebron,
right,
met with that Moshe Dayan and about the cave of the Machpelah and
right.
praying there. And Moshe Dayan said to them, and this is documented. It was kept secret for these protocols were kept secret for years until finally they were
Yeah,
released. And he said to them, what do you guys care about the Machpelah? I can arrange for you praying in the Temple Mount. Wouldn't you prefer to pray on the Temple Mount? And they said to him, no, we don't go up to the Temple Mount. And like he said, I don't understand. I can arrange for you guys to pray on the Temple Mount. He said, no, we just want the Machpelah. So when this documents came out, obviously nobody made a big thing and think about it.
right.
It was publicized in a few different places. It's
Yeah,
just unbelievable. It's unbelievable. I mean,
it is.
you say, you sometimes you try to you scratch your head and try to figure out what is wrong with these people, you know, and it's like I don't know if they're blind or they're stupid or they're evil. It's just ridiculous. You know, here at Moshe Dayan offers you the Temple Mount,
Yeah,
and I don't know where it would have led, but we're talking here about the early 70s. We're talking here about over 50 years ago.
yeah,
And then the whole dynamic could have changed. But you know, this is the what do you call it? I don't know the disease. The it's just incredible. So that didn't happen. The like we said, the government realized that if the religious Jews and the Haredi Jews aren't interested, what do they care? I mean, they only look at it at a national aspect. They don't look at it at a religious aspect.
yeah,
I
right, right.
don't know if I told you the story. I told before I showed you Rav Shimshon Elbaum. Well, his
Yep,
father started the movement, Rav Yosef Elbaum, and during the 1992 elections, when Rabin was elected, okay, prime minister, uh, we were coming down from the Temple Mount, Rabbi Elbaum and I, and we saw Rabin over here, Yitzhak Rabin, electioneering by the Kotel. So I said to Rav Elbaum, you want to talk to Rabin? He said, yeah, let's go talk to him. So we went over to him, and I said, Mr. Rabin, I said, if you're elected prime minister, you were the chief of staff when the Temple Mount was liberated. I said, if you're elected prime minister, will you give us our rights to pray in the Temple Mount? So he says, go to the rabbis. He says, go to the rabbis, get from them a letter saying that they approve praying in the Temple Mount. Or the policeman's giving us our warning.
אני אדבר איתכם באנגלית עוד מעט. להיכנס מולבים על ידי שוטרים במסלול שאתם מכירים אותו טוב טוב, זה המסלול הנהוג במקום, אני מבקש. מה אתה עושה?
זה באנגלית, זה משהו.
מבקש נשארים במעגל ההבטחה של השוטרים מהכניסה ועד ליציאה, נשמעים לראות שלהם, אנחנו קבוצה בפני עצמה, לא צירוף, בסדר? המסלול הנהוג במקום, כולכם מכירים אותו, אני מבקש לא לסטות ממנו, מעגל ההבטחה, נשארים איתנו מהכניסה ועד ליציאה, אין לבצע שום פולחן דתי, פסים, חצים מוקרים, שזה נתקלים בכל רם, משתתפים, משתחווים, מתנדדים, שמע ישראל וכו'. לא עולים תשמישי קדושה, לא עולים דגלים, לא עולים שלטים, חפצים.
Just warned us not to pray, not to say Shema Yisrael. No ritual acts, no dancing, no singing. don't touch anything, don't pick up anything, don't touch the trees, don't touch the ground. It's like a comedy. So in any event, so Robin says,
Are you allowed to make anti-Semitic remarks?
so Robin says, get a letter from the rabbis. So Rav Elmam says, when you guys went to settle Eretz Yisrael and build kibbutzim, did you ask permission from the rabbis? So Rabin says, okay, this Eretz Yisrael is what they call chulin. It's not considered holy ground, whereas the Temple Mount is holy ground. So when it comes to holy ground, go ask the rabbis. When it comes to, and a whole argument broke out when he said that. But the bottom line is that he, it's not his fault. I mean, this is what if he says, if I don't have the backing of the rabbis, the same thing Diane said. If I don't have the backing of the rabbi, why should I do anything?
Right.
Why should I give money? This is where we stand. So now, over the years, it took a lot of work and a lot of work to get get some rabbis at least to change their position, and support going up and go up themselves, and so that made a big change. Obviously,
Right.
if the heads of yeshivas come up here and bring their students, it makes a big difference. If rabbis that are rabbis of communities, of neighborhoods, of towns come up, that makes a big difference. Like Rav Lior from Kiryat Arba, Hebron, and other rabbis like that. So here we are, going up finally. We're not a big group here, because usually the first group is the biggest group. Okay, this is new. I haven't seen this before. They have. Here's the police. You see here. This is the special forces unit, and the border police. They're here waiting in case something happens. Yeah, they have another set of. So we see here. We have a very big group of police with us today, special forces. And here we are, ready to go. So, welcome to the Temple Mount. This week, of course, we're not going to talk about the weekly portion, because on the holiday, we don't read the weekly portion of the Torah. We have a special reading for the holiday. So we'll talk more about just to talk about the holiday today. The eve of Passover, the holiday commemorating our redemption from Egypt, from the bondage, from slavery, and of course the story of Egypt, of the Passover in Egypt, was that we took the god of Egypt, which was they worshipped the what do you call it, the goat, the sheep, and we tied it to the bedposts for 4 days. And the Egyptians asked us what we're doing, and we said that we're planning to slaughter their god on the 14th of Nisan, and eat it as a offering. Put the blood on the doorpost, and the Egyptians, got angry, and they wanted to kill the Jews, but they couldn't. They were so afraid of the Jews from the fear of the plagues, the 9 plagues that had been up until then. Obviously, the 10th plague was on the night of Passover, when it says that God passed over the houses. The houses we saw the blood on the doorposts, and that's the story of Passover. So that was Passover in Egypt, but there's Passover every year, obviously, and the way the Passover was celebrated, the main ritual of Passover was bringing the Passover offering. Okay, obviously without the Passover offering, it's not Passover. It's the holiday of matzah, maybe, or a holiday of independence. Here we see here the Arabs are praying out here outside the dome of outside of Al-Aqsa. You see here, police are standing and watching them.
Mm-hmm.
Here we see them. We see the doors of Al-Aqsa are closed, so I don't know if they're barricaded inside or not. There's groups of Arabs sitting here waiting. So it's not clear exactly what's going on, but everything seems to be under control.
For the moment.
So yeah, for the moment, things are under control. There's a lot of Arabs, a lot of police. You know, anything could happen, but if they're barricaded inside, oh, here the door's open. Here it seems like. Here we see the door, I think, is open over here. I guess they are barricaded inside from the way things look. The way things look, I think they're barricaded inside. Otherwise, the doors would be open. We see here the Arabs are sitting here waiting. It's what they call a Mexican standoff, right? Is that what it's called?
Well, earlier there was video of some skirmishes happening, and the Muslims inside were throwing fireworks at the Israeli police. There were some arrests made that I saw. It seemed to be quite tense earlier. We'll see what happens now.
Well, now things don't seem tense at all, but like, you know, in seconds, anything could happen. But let's,
Right.
more importantly, let's talk about, you know, I mean, as long as the police, you know, the fact that they allowed us in and didn't change the route, I would have figured they would have changed the route on us, but they didn't change the route, which is also a good sign.
There was a Canadian Islamic organization that's the main lobby group for the Islamic community in Canada that made a statement earlier today or yesterday that the statement from Itamar Ben-Gvir encouraging Jews to go up to Har Bayit. This Islamic organization called it an attack and sickening. Can you believe it?
What they do is
Instead of wishing the Jews happy Passover, they call us going up to the Temple Mount sickening and an attack.
well, what they do is the rhetoric, the Arab Muslim rhetoric is that the entire Temple Mount is the Al-Aqsa Mosque.
Right.
Okay, so when they say, when any time a Jew comes up to the Temple Mount, even though he doesn't go into the Al-Aqsa Mosque, they claim the Jews are threatening the Al-Aqsa Mosque because they're going into the Temple Mount. Now, there was a plan back in, I guess around when Arafat was still alive. Yes, Arafat, the evil anti-Semite Nazi. He had a plan where he wanted to kind of usurp the holiness, as far as the Muslims are concerned, of Mecca in Saudi Arabia, and make the Temple Mount holier than Mecca. And they had a whole plan of how to do it, and and he started to try to put it in place, and then because of the I don't know exactly how it stopped, but it basically stopped. But he had this plan, and involved putting down a new floor on the Temple Mount and putting some kind of roof, all kinds of things. But that was his plan, and by doing so, he wanted to make that it would be clear to everybody that it's not the Temple Mount, that the whole place is what they call Haram el Sharif.
Right.
So luckily that plan didn't come to play, and but that's their idea here is the Jews have no rights to the Temple Mount. As far as they're concerned, the temple never stood here. Temples was somewhere else, and it's funny because their official their official propaganda up until '67 was that the temple stood here. We have documents from them saying, or flyers that they would give out to tourists, and it said the temple stood here. After
Yeah.
'67, they changed the narrative, and suddenly the temple never stood here. That's all. I mean, they're great at lying and telling stories, and this is what we're up against. There's no on the Israeli side. Obviously, there's no. We don't have people that know how to explain our side, or they don't even. Well, there is no our side because it just doesn't exist. you know.
Right. Right.
Okay, here we are on the eastern side of the Temple Mount. We're standing here looking at what's called now the Dome of the Rock, which is obviously where the temple stood over the stone that
Yep.
said in the Holy of Holies.
Yeah.
So in front of us right in front of us would be what's called Ezrat Nashim, the women's courtyard,
Mm-hmm.
and then the Israeli courtyard, and then as we go up the steps on Passover, we mentioned the what's called the Dayenu song.
Right.
Dayenu song has 15 different verses to it, and it's based on the 15 steps that led up to from the Israeli courtyard up until the area of the where the Kohanim serve with the altar and it's all connected. It's all everything's connected to the temple service. Obviously what we read today, the Haggadah that we read today on the Seder night, is the Galut Haggadah, the one that was changed to fit the diaspora life of no Korban Pesach, no Passover offering, but
Right.
the original Haggadah that they found, of course, had the Passover offering was part of the service, and the Haggadah is a lot shorter because it didn't need to fill up the time with all kinds of stories. They were basically the main part of the whole ritual was to what do you call grill the Passover offering and eat the meal, okay, and then at the end of the meal have the Passover offering, eat the meat for the Passover offering, and that was the Seder. That was the key thing was the meal, and retelling the story of our being redeemed from Egypt. But a lot of what's been added over the years didn't exist in the original Haggadah. It's all additions that came about in the exile, and there are so many different types of Haggadot. There's so many. I once met somebody who collects. He had like the world's biggest collection of Haggadot, and he from every different type of Jewish, what do you call it? Every place in the world where Jews came from, he had the Haggadot that they would use. So it's something that's basically changed over the years because of being in the exile. But in the land of Israel, it was different. You look at the Rambam has the Haggadah. It's very short, Haggadah. There's one that was made for the Israeli soldiers because obviously if they're busy patrolling or guarding, whatever, they don't have time to sit for hours and do a regular Seder.
Right. Oops, looks like the phone just looks like
There's an
the
abbreviated version. What? What was that?
no, fine now. It froze for a moment. So now it's good.
Somebody was calling me, so that's probably what.
Okay.
Okay, so again, what would happen here today if things were done properly? Everybody would be bringing their Passover offerings, which is a sheep or a goat that would be less than a year old, and you would have divided. We would have been divided into groups. Okay, in other words, let's say a family of 20 people. They would be uh, signed up for this group, and they would be part of this sheep or goat that would have been brought up as an offering. As an advance, you have to be part of the group. You can't just show up at somebody's house or somebody's group and say I want to join in. You had to have been part of that group in advance. You had
Mm-hmm.
to have been, okay. So let's say 20 people are a group, and they have two representatives that bring up the sheep or goat, and they would do it in three rounds. Or it would be the first round of people. They'd fill up as many people as they could get in with their sheep and goats. They would they slaughter the sheep or goat, then take the blood would have been taken by the Kohanim. The priests would stand in two lines, and they'd have these vessels. Some of them were gold, some of them were silver, and they'd have an entire um, a ritual of receiving the blood and then transferring it one to the other till they got to the altar, and then the last one next to the altar would pour the blood onto the altar. And that's how they did that was the service, because the blood, obviously we don't drink blood, we take blood, and the blood, which is the life of the animal, is what's poured onto the altar. Beyond that,
Mm-hmm.
there's also parts of the inner parts of the animal that are taken and burned on the altar. Parts of the animal that we don't eat, uh, parts of the altar that we don't eat, and parts of the animal that we don't eat, we are burned on the altar. And then the animal, the meat that's left, is taken a whole. Again, remember the important thing about the Passover offering is it's not cut into pieces, it's not boiled, it's taken whole as a entire animal, and it's grilled on a fire. Now, why is this? And this was of one of the things that Rabbi Ghana would always talk about, is the fact
Mm-hmm.
that because it was the god of Egypt, and we didn't want to hide the fact that we're going to kill the god of Egypt in their faces, right in front of them. We're going to
Yeah.
slaughter the god of Egypt in their faces, and we don't want someone to think that we didn't really take their animal and grill it and we're going to eat it. So it had to be, if we would cut it into pieces, you would know it was a sheep or goat. If you boiled it, it would fall apart. By grilling it as a whole, it was clear to the people, it was clear to the Egyptians that we're going to be eating their God in their faces. And that was the sanctification of God's name. That after being enslaved by the Egyptians for such a long period of time, and and um, and thinking and claiming that the God of Egypt is like Pharaoh said, who's Hashem, who's God? I don't know who he is. He only knew his God. His God was the sheep or the goat, and now they understood that Hashem is the real God. That the sheep and the goat aren't gods. They're just it's just idolatry. It doesn't mean anything. And that was the important thing, was the sanctification of God's name by taking the whole animal, not cutting it to pieces, not breaking the bones, not boiling it, but grilling it on a fire. And that's what's missing today. We don't have that. We don't have that, what they call Misirut Nefesh, the willingness to give our lives, which the Jews, amazingly, the Jews, after all that time that they're slaves and they have a slave mentality, but when push came to shove, they were they 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 stood up and did the amazing of killing the Egyptian god in their faces, and didn't cop out, as we say, which is unfortunately today our problem. It's just a big cop out. Jews unfortunately don't have this faith and trust in God and Hashem, and kowtow to the false gods of the Muslims and the Christians. So that's why we stand where we stand, unfortunately, without the Korban Pesach, without the Passover offering. What do you think about that?
Yeah, and Baruch, add to that there was a pause of 4 days,
Right.
right? There was a
Right.
pause of 4 days. The Egyptians are coming, what are you doing?
Right.
And we answer and we say, this is your God. On the 4th day, we're going to slaughter it and we're going to eat it and we're going to roast it.
Imagine today.
Yeah, 4 days. It's like today, Wednesday, because we
Yeah.
can't.
This year, actually, like we mentioned that it works out to be perfect. That the Jews left Egypt on it was a Wednesday. It was Shabbat was the 10th, and this year the Shabbat was the 10th. That's when they took the animal and they tied it to the bedpost. And then on Wednesdays when they slaughtered the animal, and then Wednesday night was the Passover. Thursday they left Egypt. So this year works out to be perfect as far as the days of the week.
Right. That's
Basically,
incredible.
if we want to understand what it means to take the God of Egypt and slaughter it in their faces, it would be like the Israeli Air Force flying to the Vatican and destroying the Vatican, or going to Mecca and destroying Mecca. That's what it would be. That it would take something like that, to show that we trust God, and we're not afraid of the false gods of the goyim, of the Gentiles. Obviously, they're not going to do that, but that's what it would be. Obviously, here, I mean, the fact that the Israeli government protects the mosque on the Temple Mount because they're afraid of the reaction of the Muslims is also, proof that they don't have the faith and trust in God. If they did, they would put the Muslims in their places, and they'd allow us to do what we have to do here. So we're stuck in this quagmire, and something's got to happen soon. Otherwise, it'll just remain like this. טוב, אנחנו בבית המדרש על שם טליה ויצחק אימוס, השם ייקום דמם, בכבוד. מי רוצה להגיד דבר תורה? We're here at the place where we say a short Torah, in memory of Talia and Yitzhak Imas, our friends who were murdered by Arabs, I think about 12 years ago or so, on their way home to Beit Chagai. They were very involved in bringing Russian-speaking Jews up to the Temple Mount. They told us to sit here.
There was a Jew, his name was Kivi Yosef.
First, tell your name to the.
Go ahead.
I'm also Jewish.
Tell your name.
My name is
You're on
Gabriel.
live. Go ahead.
Gabriel Tauber from Yerushalayim, near a
Right.
college.
Excellent.
How long ago did he live? Kivi Yosef.
100 years ago.
A Jew from Hungary. His name was Kivi Yosef Schlesinger. Very learned. He was. As the years go by, we realize how great he was. Every year we realize how he gets greater and greater. He's the one. He was the original. He made the first Moshava, Petach Tikva. He had ideas of how to make a Jewish army. He had all types of. He even had an idea of how, in other words, we can't really do the Shleimus HaTorah. We cannot fulfill the entirety of the Torah without Yovel. שתי דקות. נמר אפשר.
אז תדבר תוך כדי הליכה, נו.
אתה...
בטח, נו, זה יום קצר. יש מיליון דברים לעשות.
מקום שני, השתדל להיות סוויץ'. יש, אנחנו כולם מתרגשים לכבוד השעה הגדולה. יש מצוות עשה מהתורה, להקריב קורבן פסח, דיברו על זה כל הימים האחרונים, דיברו כל הזמן מדברים על זה, השנה גם תכינו, עשו פה תרגול, זה קורבן פסח, בשער השפוט, שם זה קרוב ל1,000 איש, עשו את הסדר ממש כמו קורבן פסח, מההתחלה לסוף, זה שמחה עצומה, זה שמחה גדולה, שרואים איך שנהיה ציבור גודל ורוצים יותר. הגאון מווילנה אומר שלפני ביאת משיח, אנשים מחכים לביאת משיח. הגאון מווילנה אומר שלפני ביאת משיח הוא הקריבו קורבנות בהר הבית. זה גילוי שצריך לפרסם את זה בעולם, אנשים לא יודעים את זה, אני גם לא ראיתי את זה. זה מה שצריך... רבי יוסף זונדל מסלנט אומר שהוא קיבל מרב חיים ולוז'ין, שקיבל מהגאון מווילנה, שעל הקורבן תמיד הראשון שהקריבו פה בהר הבית, כל הגלות זה לאחר מעשה. זאת אומרת, כמו שאנחנו רואים, שהגאון מווילנה אמר שמדי שהרוסים הגיעו לאזור טורקיה, אז ליבו שלו יהיה שבת, זה לא להוריד כי המשיח מגיע, ורואים איך שזה מתקרב, לאט לאט מתקרב בעניין. ככה גם פה רואים איך שעשו השעה תרגול של קורבן פסח, זה כבר מראה שהעניינים מתחמם העניין. עכשיו, באמת הנקודה היא שעם ישראל זה דבר נצחי, עם ישראל זה דבר נצחי. אפילו שאנחנו לא מקריבים קורבן, אפילו השנה שעברה לא זכינו להקריב, אולי שנה נזכה, נשבור עולם כלל, אנחנו לא כל הזמן נשבור עולם כלל, אבל אין ייאוש. אבל גם השנה לא, גם מה שיהיה, עם ישראל זה נצחי, ולכן התורה היא נצחית, לכן בשני שעם ישראל רוצים להקריב קורבן פסח, אז בשנה שאנחנו לא יכולים, אז השם אומר כאילו, מעלה אני עליכם כאילו הקרבתם בקורבן פסח. אז זו נקודה שבאמת, כל העניין של קרבת השם, כל העניין של תרי"ג מצוות, זה לא עניין של לחפש דרגות, אני עוד דרגה, ואני עקפתי את החברים, אני נהיה צדיק, כי עקפתי את החברים שלי, לכן אני הייתי צדיק, החברים שלי הם פשוטים, יש כאלה שאומרים אותם מצוות, אני שומר, יש כאלה שאומרים אותם מצוות, אבל הם ככה לא עולים, אני עולה, אז אני יותר מהם, אז לכן אני צדיק. זה לא נקרא ביהדות, נקרא ביהדות, זה כמה שיותר להתבטא להשם, יותר להגיע לביטול להשם, זה נקרא להיות מרכבה לשכינה, הכוונה כמו שסוס, הוא בטל הרוכב שלו, יש מישהו רוכב לסוס, הסוס אומר ימינה, שמאלה. ככה זה נקרא מרכבה, כמו שהסוס בטל הרוכב, ככה נהיות מרכבה לשכינה, השם אומר ימינה, שמאלה. ככה זה אומר, ולכן זה העבודה שלנו, אומרים כמו יראת שמיים, זה יראת שמיים, שהשם אמר, השם ברא את השמיים, אחרי זה הוא אמר להם די, אז מה, השם אמר לעולמו די, אז הם נצאו, ומעכשיו עד עכשיו הם עומדים על הדיבור שהשם אמר להם לעצור. ככה מה על זה לכם עומדים על זה, כשאומרים יראת שמיים, אנחנו מבקשים לשם, אנחנו רוצים גם את היראה הזאת שמה שהשם עושה, אנחנו נעשה, ממש, חייבים לשם מדיבור של השם, נהיה ככה נאמנים, ככה אלפי שנים, לא נזוז מדיבור אחד של השם. אז אני רוצה לסגור את הנקודה הזאת, שהנקודה שעם ישראל זה דבר נצחי. ולכן הקורבן פסח זה לא, הקרבנו קורבן פסח, הנה עשינו עוד מצווה, יש לנו עכשיו עוד משהו, עוד כאילו יש לנו בתיק של העולם הבא שלנו, יש עכשיו גם קורבן פסח, וגם עוד תפילין, וגם עוד ציצית, וגם עוד תורה, וגם עוד מסכתות, וגם עוד דברים. אז אנחנו יותר, הכל הזה רק להתבטל, ביטול, עשינו ביטול, השם אמר להקריב קורבן פסח, אז הקרבנו קורבן פסח, השם לא זיכרנו אותנו להקריב קורבן פסח, אז זה עכשיו, ככה שמנהיג, אנחנו מורידים את הראש ומתביישים שאנחנו עדיין לא זכינו, וזה אנחנו נהיים כלי לקדוש ברוך הוא. וחלק מזה, אני חושב שהביטול השם, שאנחנו נשמח עכשיו, נשמח ונזכיר לשם, ונודה לשם, כל השנים שכן הקריבו קורבן פסח, וכל השנים שכן הקריבו קורבן, ונשמח בזה, ונתעורר בזה, ונגיע לשם, אנחנו שמחים, מתעוררים, נשמח באז מה שעם ישראל, שאנחנו אותם נשמות, עשינו השם אז לנחת רוח, אז אנחנו מתעוררים בזה, אז עולה עכשיו נחת רוח הקדוש ברוך הוא מהזמן ההוא. וגם בתוך מבחינה השמחה שלנו, שמח שהחבר שלו עושה קורבן פסח, שהחבר שלו הולך לאכול מצות, שהחבר שלו הולך, שכל ישראל עכשיו הולכים לשמור ולעשות, וזה העבודה שלנו, כמה שיותר להתאחד, בפרט במקום הזה שכאן זה שורש האחדות, להתאחד כולנו, לשמוח בשמחה שהשני עובד את השם יותר.
אמן.
השני עובד, לשמוח בזה, וככה נלכות מאוחדים ביחד, על ידי זאת מרכבה השכינה, ועל ידי זאת שנזכה כל התרי"ג מצוות, נזכה את כל הקורבנות, כל המצוות, בשמחה.
So let me just translate what he said here. He basically was talking about that the other day there was a they do every year now is before Passover they do a they have outside the old city they set up a makeshift altar, and they have Kohanim that are dressed in
Mhm.
the priest's clothing, and they have a sheep or a goat, whatever, and they do a what do you call it? Mock sacrificing of the Passover offering, so that the Kohanim, the priests, get some experience doing it. The people see it being done. They can appreciate the service. And he mentioned that he was there, and there was about 1,000 people there, and it raises the awareness and the yearnings to renew it. And he mentioned the fact that the Vilna Gaon had stated that that after we make the first sacrifice, that'll put the end to the galut, to the exile. We need to make one sacrifice, and then that'll end the period of the galut. And we find that throughout the when the Jews came into the land, the first thing they did is made a sacrifice. They came in right before Pesach, when they came in the time of Joshua, and that ended the period of galut for being in Egypt, coming into the land and making the sacrifice. That also happened in the time of the Second Temple with Ezra and Nehemiah. So
Right.
there is a matter of making a sacrifice to show the end of the period of the exile, not the Gaon of Vilna said must be done. And that's something that more as the time goes on, it becomes more and more. We realize how true that is. He mentioned the fact, he said that that we do the Korban Pesach, or when we want to do the Korban Pesach, we want to do it because we're commanded to do it by God. God commanded us, and we have to do it. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to do it for whatever reason, and we have to, despite the fact, even though we haven't been able to succeed in doing it, we still need to be happy, because we're continuing the tradition of the Korban Pesach, the millions and millions of Jews throughout the years that the temple existed and did the Korban Pesach, did the Passover offering. We're showing the eternity of the Torah, the eternity of the Jewish people, that we haven't given up, that we still want to do it, that we're just waiting for it to be renewed. And I think it was a very good point, the connection between us and those generations that did succeed or merit the bringing of the Korban Pesach. That we're just a continuation of that tradition, the eternity of the Torah. So again, we see that there's more and more interest in bringing the Passover offering. Get there soon, B'ezrat Hashem. He mentioned the war between Russia and the Ukraine. That apparently it has something to do with this what would you call it, messianic times that we're in, or we're entering, and who knows what it's going to lead to. He mentions that the Gaon of Vilna, the Vilna Gaon mentioned something about Russia coming into Turkey, and who knows where he's headed after he finishes off the Ukraine, and or at the entrance to Turkey or something like that. I don't know exactly the whole story, but apparently there's some kind of messianic traditions that has something to do with the messianic era. So certainly, when two evil nations like the Russians and the Ukrainians are killing each other, it can't be bad. It can't be bad. Yes, with the things that they've done to the Jewish people, especially those Ukrainians.
Pray for a high score on both sides.
Right. Pray for, I would kind of say, pray for a high score on both sides.
Right.
Right. And in this case, we especially despite what the Russians have done to us, the Ukrainians are far worse and getting everything they deserve. So here we are now. We're on the northern side. We'll see here, right in front of us, the place of the temple, the place of the altar. It's very quiet up here. There's practically nobody here.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Everybody's barricaded inside the Alaska Mosque,
Right.
so there's nothing going on up here. We see that, like we said, during the Ramadan, they put up these poles up with some kind of awning, canopies, to so people could stand here, I guess, and pray. But here we see over here to the right, to the left, and over here to the right. Like I said, it's very quiet, very strange. It's a good sign. It's a good sign that they're not up here. We don't want them here.
Right.
So we're standing here. We can see the area. This is where it all would happen. The people would be up here. This is the courtyard of the priests, where the altar stood. The people. What?
If they can see him, in case anyone's a bachur.
Oh. He's making this Jew is making a Siu Masechet because he's a poor. Today is, of course, the the fast of the firstborn.
Right.
Because of we know that because the firstborn of the Egyptians were killed during the Jews have a fast for the firstborn. In order to avoid the fast, you do a Siu Masechet, the finishing of a tractate. This is what this man is doing here.
Excellent.
Okay. So he just completed his learning the tractate. Now he doesn't have to fast. Okay. Now we're continuing along the northern side of the Temple Mount. So, of course, Passover is 7 days. Okay, according to the Torah, 7 days. The first day is the holiday, meaning it's not allowed to work, not allowed to do, almost like Shabbat. The only thing you're allowed to do is you can cook food for the holiday. Yes, you can carry things in the public domain, which you're not supposed to do on Shabbat. And then we have 5 days, intermediary days, where people can travel. If you have to work with something that will be lost if you don't work, you're allowed to work. But it's still a holiday in the sense of you can't have chametz, you can't eat from leavened bread. You have to have if you want to eat bread, you have to have matzah. There's still a mitzvah to come up to the Temple Mount to show yourself on the Temple Mount, like every holiday.
Mm-hmm.
You're supposed to bring a sacrifice with you, but obviously that's not going to happen. But at the very least, you have to show your face. You have to, like there's a thing of because of the exile, not being able to go to the Temple Mount, they said you have to go see your rabbi. You have to go to see your rabbi on the holiday. That was as if a proxy for the Temple Mount. Go see your rabbi.
Yeah.
But here you can come here in Eretz Yisrael. You can come up to the Temple Mount and show your face before Hashem, before God, and all a lot of people do come up. They take the opportunity. This year it's going to be a problem because again it's Ramadan and I don't know how they're going to.
Closing it now for like 10 days.
And yeah, well, apparently like right after Passover is over, they're going to close it. And not going to allow Jews up at all. I don't know exactly when that's supposed to happen. I assume the week after Passover they'll close it. Here we are on now. We just got to the western side. Here's the western wall. I've shown it before. You see it here. The stones, the bottom of the steps here. This is the real western wall of the Temple
Right.
Mount, not the one where everybody prays at, because that's a Herodian addition. That's was built by King Herod, the evil king, who extended the borders of the Temple Mount to the west, to the south, and to the north. So that's an important landmark here, because from this landmark, if you measure properly, you see that the eastern wall is the original wall from the Temple Mount.
Yep.
The Herod did not extend. These measurements are very important because of the altar. The altar has to be built in its original place. So by knowing the measurements and having these landmarks like this wall here, we're able to figure out exactly where the altar stood, and when we're going to build it, we'll build it in the right place. There's a whole like you mentioned before, Meir, about the rabbis. There's all kinds of different opinions, and we need the people learning and discussing and coming to conclusions. So on the matter of the place of the altar, in the time of the Second Temple, when they came back in the time of Ezra and Nehemiah. They came back after being in Babylon for the Babylonian exile for 70 years. They obviously renewed. They right away started building the temple, and they built right away an altar, making sacrifices even before they built the temple. As we know, that halachically you're allowed to do that. But the question was, how did they know where to build the altar? Everything was destroyed. So it's mentioned that there were 3 prophets that had come back from Babylon, which is Hananiah. It was Malachi, Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi, the last 3 of the minor prophets. And so a lot of people want to stay from that to find the place of the altar, you need prophecy. Without prophecy, you can't find it. But in fact, these prophets had been in the temple, the temple, first temple when it existed, and they weren't coming to prophesize. They came and gave a testimony. In other words, they had witnessed it. Being that they had witnessed it, and being that they were prophets, meaning that they were very holy men, that their testimony was accepted, that this is where the altar stood. They didn't need to be given a prophecy from Hashem, from God, to tell where the altar was. That's very important. In other words, we don't need prophecy to tell us where the altar was. We need wise men who will learned people and experts in archaeological experts and so on, who've done measurements and determined where the place of the altar stood based on the measurements and the understanding. We say, it's mentioned in the Talmud, that a wise man is more than a prophet. In other words, you don't need prophecy is like a gift from God to help us, but it's not necessary. If you have people, wise men, people who've learned, they can determine all these things without any kind of prophecy. So we're not any rabbi that says we need prophecy in order to renew the sacrifices is basically either doesn't know or he's purposely finding an excuse not to do it. Yeah, he's stalling for time. Here we are now on the western side. We see here the place of the temple where the Holy of Holies stood, and Did you want to finish? Wait, your story. Yeah, we were in the middle story of Rabbi Schlesinger.
Yeah.
He was the
So-
famous rabbi who wanted to blow the shofar on Shabbat, right?
He did.
He
He
did.
actually did, but he didn't admit it. When Rishon falls on Shabbos, he did blow the shofar actually, and he got all the rabbis of Yerushalayim to agree, including Reb Shmuel Salam and the all the rabbis of Yerushalayim, and the Kanoim they didn't allow it to. He did it like the Yochid. He didn't do it in front of everyone. He did have an idea about how do you bring back the Sesa Shvatim, but his idea was that the
10
redemption
tribes. How do we
comes.
bring it 10 tribes?
The redemption comes with Derech HaTeva, but also with an idea of Shemaimi. Did he say that?
All right, so we need that the redemption has to be a combination both of our acts and Hashem's intervention.
So he had a plan, and this is amazing. His whole shita was like that. He himself, like I said before, he made the first Moshava. All the credit that the Chilonim take for the Moshavot that they made, the first Moshava, that's the fact. The first Moshava was with the money that he himself, 10% he gave, and he raised the rest of the money. He made the first Moshava, and it was a successful Moshava, except they stole it from him after. But this is like ultra orthodox as much as it, and he fought the reformers. Most of his books actually deal with fighting those that the reformers.
Actually, it's interesting that even Arik Sharon said that the original Zionists are or the Haredim, like Rabbi like the rabbi I mentioned, Rabbi Schlesinger, who bought the land for the city of Petach Tikva, right?
Then it was a Moshava. Now it's a city.
Yeah.
The Petach Tikva. Now the first Moshava, there's no question about it. The first Moshava in Israel was made by Rabbi Akiva Schlesinger. Now he had an idea how to bring back the Sesa Shvatim.
How to bring back the 10 tribes? Yeah, an idea.
Not so much to bring them back. To know, until everyone knows where they're from, which state they're from, which tribe they're from, we can't really have Yovel. And he said that he had a plan of action, because from Chazal there's different elements of each Shevet. There's a way to figure out. Some people have an atiyah for this and that.
Like I'm from the tribe of God. How would you say about that?
It's a whole Torah that he had, but he in other words, he was convinced that the way to bring everything back is according to the Teva, but there will be an element of this. And it was a combination of starting to figure it out, and then there will be some Rebbe's Shemayim, and that's just amazing. Now, why did I bring him up? Because he's the one, and he says a tremendous chiddush. It sounds really. He says that you could bring the Korban Pesach, which is today, without a mizbeach.
Oh, this is very interesting. Okay, we have here. I've heard this before. I didn't know it was from him. The idea that we can bring a sacrifice of the Passover offering without an altar. Okay, what?
Now most people will tell you this is totally outrageous, because if you learn the sugya, in the Gemara,
right,
you see that the Moed Yehuda B'Damim, that only a Korban Mincha, for example, you don't need a mizbeach.
Right,
but if there's dam, now he goes to he's Mishaches. He deals with the sugya.
Very interesting.
And he said, and there's another Gemara that says that the Karen is ma'akev. The how do you say, the corners of the Mizbeach. How do you deal with that if it's ma'akev? So, and he answers it all.
Very interesting. We have here a testimony to the fact that Rabbi Schlesinger had answers to all these questions that would have allowed us, according to his understanding, would allowed us to bring the Passover offering today as is without an altar. Very interesting. I'd like to learn more about that. So,
in fact, we would have to do it even if we wouldn't have a shita like that. We would have to do it because the whole problem that we have today is everyone's saying you bring Pesach since World War III. Just like they said when they said Trump's going to move the embassy to Jerusalem, it's the end of the world. Nothing happened. It became even more secure. It was even better. And if we bring now the Korban Pesach, and even if you hold that it's not really a Korban Pesach, but for the world, there's no difference if there's a Mizbeach or not Mizbeach. But especially since we have a shita of Rabbi Schlesinger that you actually can bring it, there's no excuse, there's no alternative. We have to do it.
Chag Sameach, I should go. So we had Chag Sameach. So we heard here, very interesting Kiddush brought down by Rabbi Schlesinger, who said that we can bring the Passover offering without an altar. I want to learn more about that. I've heard it before. I didn't know what the source of it was, and that would make obviously life a lot easier for us to bring the offering without having to build an altar. So that's something that we'll explore in the future. So we completed our trip to the Temple Mount this week. Obviously, we didn't talk about the weekly portion as we usually do, but we
talked about Pesach, the Korban Pesach, and people have to know that.
yep. So we'll see what happens.
People have to know that Pesach is one day.
We have to.
You don't observe Pesach.
Right, Pesach is
We
like
only observe Chag HaMatzot. So
Pesach,
they
right,
say
exactly.
Pesach,
Pesach is
Pesach Sameach, that's all false.
right. Pesach is one day, and the rest of the 7 days are
Chag HaMatzot.
the Chag of the Matzah, the
Right.
holiday of the Matzah. And so by people, it's amazing that people continue to call it Passover, Pesach, even though the sacrifice hasn't been done in 2,000 years. It's very interesting. Sometimes how these things, these traditions, things evolve and traditions are kept simply by the name that it's called. All right, so we'll see what happens on Chol HaMoed, on the intermediary days, if they're allowing us up, if what's going on. Nobody knows what's happening, but if we can get up, hopefully we'll have a we'll talk about the weekly portion of Shmini, which is next week.
So, Mark, just a little question. So you mentioned that are Jews going to be allowed up during Pesach, during Chol HaMoed, or are they going to
Well, I would
restrict?
assume that they are. I would assume that if nothing changes, and seeing how the police did take care of the situation today, and I assume that in Chol HaMoed, when there are going to be thousands of people here at the Western Wall, and then hundreds of people coming to go to the Temple Mount, I'm sure that they're going to make sure that it's accessible.
Right.
After that, they had mentioned that the last 10 days of Ramadan, the last week of Ramadan, they were going to close the Temple Mount. So I would assume that that's after Passover.
Yeah,
But-
it is, because the end of Ramadan is, I think it's on April 16th. And
Cool.
on April 15th and 16th, Muslims are going to be keeping, lots of Muslims are going to be keeping what's called Al-Quds Day.
Right.
And Al-Quds Day calls for the destruction of Israel. And if they're going to exclude Jews from the Temple Mount and permit Al-Quds Day to take place on Har Bayit, I mean, that's just an accelerated abomination.
Yeah.
Oh, now the volume for you is, can't hear you now.
I pressed on the wrong button. Okay.
Oh, now we can hear you, yes.
Okay. So you were saying that they called it what? Al-Quds Day?
Yeah, they call it Al-Quds Day, and that's originated out of Iran in 1979 when Khomeini took power. And they dedicate the last day of Ramadan to what they call Al-Quds Day. And on Al-Quds Day, they call internationally for the destruction of Israel, all of it. And if the Israeli government is going to restrict Jews from coming up, especially then, and allow Muslims to have this Al-Quds Day, I mean, what does that say about the so-called right-wing government that we have all these hopes for?
I I'll tell you the truth. I didn't have much hope to begin with,
Okay.
and I don't. I think we're fooling ourselves, and I think that the time is showing that it's not. They don't know how to rule. They don't know how to show sovereignty.
Yep.
It's always been a problem, and it just doesn't change. So our hopes are. If we had any hopes, it's basically been proven that. I mean, here and there there'll be improvements, like they canceled the law of about the expulsion of Jews from the northern Samaria. They deal with there are some laws that are going to be in, some things that will happen that are positive, but for the most part there's not going to be any revolutionary change, and that's the
Well,
situation.
There's revolutionary change and there's incremental change. But one thing for sure is that we're speaking out. There's some other people who are speaking out. We're able to access social media to get the word out. So we have to get it out. And there was a way that they used to stifle everyone's voices now. Now we're getting it out, and more people are hearing about this. But at least that's one way that we're making a difference. In a dark room, if you light a candle, a small candle, it still shows a little bit of light, and it still extinguishes some of that darkness. That's one of the things that we want to do, and that's why we're moving ahead. And we're determined. There's no question about it. We're determined, and
Okay.
it doesn't matter if we see the result tomorrow or something like that. We're just pushing.
Yep. Never stop. We never can give up.
Right.
We don't have the right to give up. We have to. Have to keep up what we're doing, and who knows when the big change will happen? It can happen all of a sudden. Things can
Right.
change.
Right. Right. Baruch, thank you very much. We'll
Okay.
see you next week during Chol Hamoed. It's always a bracha having you up on Har Bayit explaining the Parsha and explaining Pesach to our viewers. We're going to share this. This is downloaded on YouTube as well. So we'll be sharing this a lot all over the place. And we'll influence people. That's what we have to do.
All right. Talk Sameach. Have a happy
Thanks,
holiday.
man. Have a great
We'll see you
Pesach.
next week.
Absolutely. Thanks very much.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.